Hello, Frizzle Frenzy. This summer, 3 authors that I already love are coming out with romance books and a romantasy book, and I have managed to snag early copies of all 3. So I am so excited to read these, and I'm going to be reading them with you today in this video. I'm going to be reading a book by Katherine Center, Christina Lauren, and Allison Saft. Let's go. The first of the books I'm picking up is the Rom-Commers, which comes out on June 11th. I've read one book by this author before, which was Things You Save in a Fire, and I loved it. I read it in one day, I binged it, it pulled out my heart, it put it back together again. I wasn't quite obsessed with it, but I did love it a lot, and I'm so excited to start my next Katherine Center. So the Rom-Commers is following 2 Hollywood screenwriters. One, our hero Charlie, is very successful. He's written a lot of action and sci-fi flicks. And our heroine, she's written a few scripts that won some awards but never got turned into movies. She's never really had her big break because mostly she's been spending her time taking care of her father, who is half paralyzed. And that's kind of taken over her whole life and stopped any career ambitions she might have had. But our hero Charlie needs to write a rom-com script because he needs to make someone in Hollywood happy to get one of his action flicks made. And he cannot write a rom-com. He hates rom-coms, he hates romance, he doesn't believe in love. A few years ago, he went through a really bad divorce and so has been kind of romantically traumatized. And so our heroine Emma is brought in to help him write this rom-com as a ghostwriter and critique partner. And at first, he does not want her there. This is just something his agent is shoving on him. And then he realizes that he really does need her help, and so agrees. And she is staying with him at his mansion. So right now I'm 40% in, and this book is so readable. I am loving it. One of the big narrative pushes right now is our heroine is very anxious about her father. She's left him behind in the care of her younger sister, and she's really worried about his health. She's really anxious about it all, and that's really tugging on my heartstrings. It's really well done, and I can feel the anxiety, but not too much that I'm unhappy. This book does have a little bit of silliness and a little bit of cheesy interactions between our leads, but I wouldn't quite call it a rom-com despite its title. On the romance spectrum, from full silly cheesy rom-com to dramatic, big deep emotions, women's fiction kind of romances, I would say it's leaning more towards the chick lit side of the scale, which I like. Too much goofiness and it starts to make me not like the book anymore. Both invested in the future romance between these 2 characters because they haven't even started flirting yet, and how their script is going to turn out. But I think the plotline that I'm most invested in is seeing this grumpy screenwriter guy find love. It doesn't matter if there's a happy ending, and I'm excited to see him find his happy ending and really care about it. The biggest conflict between our 2 leads right now is that she is pushing him to try to feel emotions. He's kind of closed himself off from all of the grief of his breakup, from all of the hoping for love, and she's pushing his buttons, trying to get him to admit that, yeah, his breakup did suck. Yeah, his life is bad. Now, let's feel that and move on. And I can't wait for this breaking point. I'm very excited. I'd say my predicted rating right now for this book is 4 stars, but I could see it going up to 5 because I'm really having a good time. So I finished the Rom-Commers. What did I think? If I had checked in with you guys immediately after finishing this book, I would have given you a review like this. The Rom-Commers is so easy to read, and I had such a good time with it, and it really pulled at my heartstrings, and I cried, and I loved it. Though it is called the Rom-Commers, the tone of the book isn't super rom-com-y. There is a little bit of a rom-com-y premise, but the book takes itself very seriously. And now, it's been like 2 days since I finished this book, and I've had time to think on it and process it, so I'm really ready to give you a thorough review. But in another way, I'm not, because I feel like I've forgotten, everything about this book already. I read it in a day. I finished it so quick. I binged this book because it was so easy to read, and it left, 0 impression on my brain. I know that I cried reading this book at some point, but I couldn't tell you why. And definitely when I was reading it, I shipped these characters, because at the heart, this book is like a romance, right? But thinking on it, it's I really wanted these characters to get together because they both seemed lonely and they needed more love in their life, and I shipped them in that way. But I didn't actually like either of these characters. So it's kind of hard to get excited about their happily ever after in another way, you know? Sure, our heroine, Emma, was fun to follow in some ways, but in other ways, she felt very over-the-top, melodramatic, and kind of annoyingly clumsy and goofy a lot of the time. And though it did hook me in the moment, the longer I sit on it, the more dissatisfied I am. I think another thing that this book didn't quite land is our hero is very dislikable at the beginning. And I think the core of that is that he fundamentally doesn't respect our heroine. He looks at her like a failed screenwriter. And then over the course of the book, he does come to respect her a little bit more. And still, a lot of the conflict between them comes because of a lack of respect from him to her repeatedly over and over. Like, he was definitely better than at the beginning of the book, but still, she could do better, you know? I certainly think it's got a fun premise, and I really enjoyed the discussions on writing throughout this book. And there's a lot of passages on this book about the joy of writing and how much they worked well together, and I thought that was particularly well done. So am I going to recommend the Rom-Commers? I think yes, because this was incredibly readable, easy, and I did enjoy my time reading it. And I certainly think that if you're someone who will connect even deeper to the themes and the conflicts in this book around especially health problems in a family and caretaking duties around that, then this book could really hit a lot harder and deeper for you than it did for me. I also think it depends on what you're looking for in a book, that I am typically looking for a little bit more depth and things to chew on and keep me thinking. And so my long-term impression of this book is that I'm dissatisfied. But if you're just looking for that short-term impression of I want something to entertain me today, I think it's great. Now, where do I land with my star rating? I think I'm gonna give it 4 stars. If I was just rating it on how I was feeling as I was reading the book, it would probably get 5 stars because I couldn't put it down. But taking a step back, thinking on it, feels more like a 3-star, so let's average it out. 4 stars it is. Now let's move on to another summer romance read from one of my favorite authors. So the next book I'm reading is Tangled Up In You by Christina Lauren. There's a few reasons that I'm so excited for this book, which is first, this is a modern day retelling of Tangled. Tangled, probably my favorite Disney movie. I love it. It's so cheerful and romantic and adventurous and fun, and it holds a special place in my heart. Now, I'm also excited about the Christina Lauren bit about this book because I've only read one book from them, which was The Soulmate Equation, and I gave it 5 stars. So things are looking very good for this book, based off one of my favorite movies by an author that I've loved before. And right now I'm 50% in to Tangled Up In You. This book is dual perspective. I love it. Wren, our Rapunzel character, she's grown up on a remote homestead all of her life. Her parents are very anti-modern influences. So she's pretty much never used like a computer and rarely a phone, and is just very much living off-grid. Now, there are a few aspects of this part of Wren's upbringing that I really admire in this book, which is first, the book goes out of its way to establish that these parents are not religious or political extremists, they're just isolationist for their own reasons. So I'm glad that this book just kind of did the bare minimum of not demonizing any particular group, because going into this book I was kind of worried about that. And then one of the interesting things about these parent characters is that they're our antagonists, right? These are the analog to Mother Gothel. In order for Wren to get her full character arc and break out and find her full potential, she's going to need to rebel against them. And the interesting thing is, unlike Mother Gothel in the Tangled movie, where she is just like evil, right? And when she's killed, we cheer. This book has made these parents a little bit more sympathetic. Like, yes, they are unreasonable in some of their views, but they're not full out evil and abusive towards Wren. Like, sure, Wren doesn't know how to Google things, but she grew up in a loving household that provided for her needs. And I really like the nuance that this injects to the conflict, where I am rooting for Wren to get more independence and to break out of this restrictive mold that her parents have put her in, but I'm not entirely anti her parents, right? It's not like she should go completely no contact from them for her well-being. It makes the conflict between her and her parents a little bit more sticky and less clear-cut than if they had made the parents pure evil, which I really enjoyed that nuance in this book. And I'm excited to see how it pans out. hopefully it's good. So anyway, Ren decides that she wants to go to college. She cajoles her parents into finally agreeing to it under many strict rules of no boys and no booze, and you have to be at home on weekends. So she goes off to college and she loves it. She loves learning. She loves the environment. She loves making friends her own age. And there's also a lot of culture shock there where she has to adjust and it's difficult for her. But she's very sunshiny, positive all the way through. It is there where she meets our other protagonist, Fitz. Of course, the Flynn writer. And he is charismatic, beloved by nearly everyone at the college, top of most of his classes, but also has a reputation as quite the playboy. And he has a past which has been hinted at is quite sad and full of poverty, but he likes to present to the world that he's a rich boy with no problems. And Ren and Fitz have a class together. Their relationship isn't the smoothest, but it's not entirely enemies. But Fitz feels very threatened by Ren because before he was always top of the classes, which is one of his big goals, and now she's beating him in one of his classes. This kicks off a chain of events that leads to them going on a cross-country road trip together. I'm like, ugh, I am loving this book. I love that the plot stands on its own, that even if you had never seen Tangled, like, it would work. But it also has a lot of really fun Tangled adjacent scenes. At the point that I'm at now, we are finally starting to get some attraction and flirting between our couple as they're on their road trip. It's taken us quite a while to get here, and I really enjoyed that slow burn where we're focusing more on both of their separate conflicts. But now that their plots are becoming more intertwined, they're also getting a lot more bonding moments with each other. So I'm breezing through this book. I am loving it. As a Tangled fan, I am over the moon, but I'd also recommend this to people who don't have any particular love for Tangled. Now, I think predicted rating right now would be 4 stars. I'm loving it, but it doesn't give me that 5-star feeling yet. So I finished Tangled Up In You, and I have some mixed opinions. I definitely enjoyed the first half much more than the second half. And there's a few reasons for that. One, remember how I was praising so much that they gave real humanity and nuance to Ren's parents, where they weren't 100% bad guys, and I expected the conflict between Ren and her parents to be very sticky because of it? Well, the book kind of went back on that, and by the end of the book, her parents were mostly irredeemable, and you're just supposed to cheer for the antagonist's downfall at the end of the book. And I didn't love how we had backed off on the nuance that I thought we had found. Now, another thing about the second half of this book that I didn't absolutely love is that it focuses a lot on the physical relationship between Fitz and Ren, I think to the detriment of developing their emotional relationship with each other. Like, technically, this book is a closed-door romance. It does not get super spicy. There's just some kisses. But so much of the characters' thoughts, of the plot, of the conflict is all focused around, but are they gonna bang? And so much of the conversations in the second half of this book are about how Ren has never been kissed, how she's all innocent in this way, and them having a lot of discussions around like how to make her first time the best. And I just would have like loved more conversations where they opened up to each other about their emotions instead, you know? And one of the things that also made it a little harder for me to love the second half of the book is just that, like, it didn't feel like it knew what its identity was being. Because though technically it's low spice in what actually happens on the page, the way that the characters talk about each other and about their kisses and all of that feels higher spice level than it actually ends up being. So for the entire book, I was just kind of in this limbo, like, where's this gonna go? Anyway, and then also the climax of this book, following the plot of Tangled, ends up being more action-centric than the typical romance novel, and more action-centric than the beginning and middle of this novel really set up for. And consequently, I don't really think the ending really lands. So I really love the beginning of this book. Love all the Tangled vibes. I feel like it didn't quite stick the landing, but I did love my time with this book overall. I think I would definitely recommend this book if you're a big fan of the Tangled movie. It works mostly as a romance novel, though I do wish they had leaned more into romantic suspense from the beginning instead of just throwing it in at the end. What else is there? I loved how competent they made our Rapunzel character, that even though she was naive, she was never stupid, and rarely even out of her element completely. Just a little bit fish out of water, but not too much. And even if you're not a fan of Tangled, the movie, I think you can still enjoy this book. It stands on its own just enough. But without my love for Tangled influencing me, I think I would end up giving this book 3 stars because I have so much love and nostalgia for Tangled, and I do think this book nailed the Tangled vibes. I'm gonna give it 4 stars. Because yeah, I love it for adapting one of my favorite movies. It's fun. It was a cute book, and I think I'm gonna go watch the movie Tangled now. The third book is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft. This book comes out on September 17th. So happy to be reading this one, but I'm also a little apprehensive. My background with reading this author's books is I've given them a 5-star, a 4-star, and a 2-star to the most recent release. The 5-star, which I read, makes me very excited to get into A Dark and Drowning Tide, but the 2-star makes me quite apprehensive and much less excited. But jumping in, now I am halfway through this book. Let me tell you about it. This book takes place in a historical fantasy version of like 1800s Europe somewhere. And we are following a girl named Lorelei. A big part of her identity is first that she's a scholar and she's fighting tooth and nail for respectability in the scholastic community. And one of the things that's holding her back is anti-Semitism. She's part of this religion that's very Jewish coded, and even though she doesn't feel a big connection to that culture herself, it's something that everyone sees her as and judges her for. And she is on this expedition to find this magical river, and a lot of clout is resting on this expedition. Also on the expedition is her mentor, and I think 5 other people who are all different specialties. One of them studies plants, one of them studies magical energy, etc. Now, also on this expedition is Sylvia, the blonde one on this cover. They have a rivalry. It's definitely supposed to be kind of an enemies to lovers arc, but this is where the book first trips me up, where it tells us that they don't like each other. It tells us that they don't get along, but it never actually shows us why they hate each other or how they're even not getting along, because on page they usually get along quite well, actually. Like, they rarely even fight. They'll occasionally snipe at each other, but they actually work pretty well together. And it's just repeatedly telling us in the narration that, I hate Sylvia, how dare. And I've just been wondering throughout the entire first half of this book, why? What's up with Sylvia? Why is she enemy number 1? And the book keeps giving ridiculous reasons for it. I hate Sylvia. She's so nice and cheerful. But the character isn't even all that annoyingly nice and cheerful. Or I hate Sylvia. Her favorite color is amethyst. And it just feels like a tantruming toddler almost when the book tries to explain why they're enemies, because it's so unfounded in the actual scenes between them. Finally, we got a little bit more explanation where it explained that they were academic rivals at school. And Lorelei, our protagonist, felt a little threatened by her academic achievements. It still feels like so little of a thing to lead to the huge amount of hatred and vitriol that our protagonist is always spewing in the direction of Sylvia. And I love a good enemies to lovers, and I'm looking for that, but just this book is not selling me on them being enemies when Sylvia is only incredibly nice and accommodating towards Lorelei at all times, and all that Lorelei can give me for why she hates her is well, she's so enthusiastic about studying magical creatures. How dare? And what are you talking about? Every time our protagonist declares her hatred for Sylvia, I just want to laugh because it seems so absurd and clumsy. And so our group of adventurers set off to go find this magical river, and pretty quickly, one of them gets murdered. And so this book adds into itself a closed circle murder mystery. But so far, I haven't been very impressed with how that's pulled off either. It's been barely touched on as our characters have started investigating, but it doesn't really feel like that's really going anywhere either. I think one of the other things that's making it hard for me to really get into this book is it's missing establishing shots. When you're watching a TV show and we cut from one plot to the next plot, and first you get a shot of the outside of a building just to establish oh, now we're on this plot. Well, this book doesn't have any of the equivalent of those. I'm repeatedly feeling confused and unmoored about where we are or what's happening in a scene. I've had to reread quite a few pages to try to understand what's happening on a technical level. I think that's compounded also with uncareful and messy world building, where there are for example, magical creatures in this world. And at one point there's a scene where a character gets attacked randomly by a magical creature, and I was so caught off guard that like that's the thing that could just happen in this world, when like that simple world building of the creatures are dangerous and will hunt you down wasn't ever really established, you know? So what's my predicted rating for A Dark and Drowning Tide? Optimistically, I want to say 3 stars, but the more that I'm talking about that, the more it feels more like 2 stars. I'm going to give it some more time to see how it develops, because yes, I have loved books by this author before, but not loving it right now. So I'll check in with you when I've finished the book, or when I've given up on it. I finished A Dark and a Drowning Tide, and the second half was better than the first. I think the biggest difference between those is in the second half, we get more into the quest and they actually start having progress on it. And we get more of the romance. Instead of our protagonist just insisting that she hates this woman for no reason, it starts exploring their attraction to each other and also the tension of still having some hatred in there. So definitely more entertaining than the first half of the book on many levels. Enough to keep me reading all the way to the end, and I was satisfied-ish. I think the people I would recommend this to is the people who really like to read from the perspective of someone who's self-sabotaging, especially in their relationships. One of the main conflicts in this book is our protagonist doesn't quite feel like she deserves love or respect. And so when she does gain some of those things, she's often quick to turn it around and self-sabotage. And I found that pretty frustrating, and like the book didn't quite lay all the groundwork I needed to believe in it. But if that's the kind of protagonist you do love reading from, I think it could work for you. But one of the things that definitely continued is like on a scene level and on a world building level and on a character relationships level, we were never quite given enough detail to anchor us in a scene. And like, here's a small example. At one point, our protagonist is trying to sneak around on a boat. And throughout the entire book before this point, she's been sneaking around in the hallways. And then all of a sudden, it's just like, and then she stepped out on the balcony. And I'm like, this boat has balconies, and it just does literally no groundwork to establish that there is a balcony to sneak up on, which they would have been using before this scene if there was, and just like things like that that are just like take me out of the scene every single time that they happen, and this book is littered with those. So overall, I'd give A Dark and Drowning Tide 3 stars. It was just barely readable. It just barely kept my attention. I didn't quite ship the romance, but I think if grumpy sunshine self-sabotaging is your thing, you could love this a lot more than I did. So in this video, we got a 4-star, a 4-star, and a 3-star, which I'm gonna call a success. That's higher than my typical average rating for 3 books because, alas, I am a hater at heart in a lot of ways. But hopefully, as you join me for my past and future video projects, they'll go better than this one, because I was so excited for all of these books from authors that I've loved before. So, was kind of hoping for a 5-star, a little disappointed I didn't get it. It'll work. And I highly recommend you watch another one of my reading projects like this one.